39 years of marriage. Can you imagine how long that is? It's a significant portion of a lifetime spent together. I dreamed of growing old with my wife, with whom I had shared so many years. My friends and colleagues often envied me, believing I had a strong and unshakable marriage. But as with many things, appearances can be deceiving. Yes, damn it! I exclaimed into my cell phone as I drove west on the highway, about 2 hours from Columbus, on a beautiful Sunday in July. The sun was shining brightly, and I was speaking loudly into the phone while driving at a leisurely speed. Both windows were rolled down, the hatch was open, and the wind turned my car into a tunnel of rushing air. Yet the engine purred steadily, handling no worse than a more expensive vehicle. The car, a 1996 Ford Probe, was special to me. Once hailed as one of Detroit's most unique cars, this one was mine and mine alone. It was a recent gift from my wife during our trip to Washington. When I first received it, I couldn't contain my delight. I'd exclaimed to Tracy, "It's just amazing." Her face lit up with a smile. "I'm so glad you like it," she replied. "Just promise to drive responsibly and avoid any costly speeding fines." Grinning, I reassured her, "Don't worry, I'll just stay a little over the speed limit. The road's empty, it'll be fine." "All right, I'll see you tomorrow night," she said, ending the call. I tossed the phone onto the empty passenger seat and let out a joyful scream. I'd been on the road for about 5 hours, planning to stop in Columbus for dinner and spend the night. At 63, I didn't think I could handle a 12-hour drive in one go like I might have at 35 or 45. If Tracy had been with me, we could have taken turns driving and maybe completed the trip in a day. But this time I was alone. I had always been a fan of the Ford Probe. My first encounter with it was in 1989, during its debut year. As soon as I saw its sleek, futuristic design at a local dealership, I was captivated. After waiting a week, I finally visited the dealership to test drive it. The experience was unforgettable. The original Mazda engine delivered not only power and speed, but also exceptional fuel efficiency. Its handling was responsive, almost like a racing car. A slight turn of the wheel made it glide effortlessly across the road. I ended up driving my first Probe for 11 years, and when the time came, I bought my second one in 1996, its final production year. I drove that car for nearly 200,000 miles before it met its unfortunate end in an accident that wasn't my fault. Ever since, I'd been trying to replace it, scouring eBay and other websites without success. For the past 2 years, I'd been driving a dull, ordinary car. Retirement brought unexpected joy. After working 40 years in the insurance industry, I had finally retired. The work was monotonous, but it paid well enough to allow me to retire a few years before turning 65. My colleagues threw me a small farewell party, where my wife joined me. The gifts were thoughtful, but the highlight came when my wife handed me a car key. At first, I was confused. It was one of my old car keys, attached to a note. I soon learned that my daughter and son-in-law had tracked down a Ford Probe for me in near-perfect condition with low mileage. The car was located near Washington, so the plan was for me to fly there, spend the weekend with family, and drive the car back home. Tracy had booked me a hotel in Columbus for Sunday night. Initially, I thought she would accompany me, but she explained this journey was mine alone, an opportunity to reconnect with my new car. The car, a black GT Turbo, represented Ford's 90s engineering marvel. By that time, Ford had begun producing their own engines for the Probe. This model featured a turbocharged V6 engine, which produced an impressive roar, though it sacrificed some fuel efficiency compared to the earlier 4-cylinder Mazda engine. The trip began in the mountains of West Virginia, an exhilarating but nerve-wracking challenge. Multiple lanes, unpredictable speed limits, towering trucks, sharp turns, and sudden lane changes created a chaotic environment. one that wasn't for the faint of heart. Yet, in that moment, I felt alive, connected not just to the road but to the machine that I'd cherished for so long. Based on my earlier experiences with two other test participants, I was confident in the Ford probe's ability to handle any obstacles in its path. Personally, I loved driving through the highlands. Those roads offered the thrill of testing the car's capabilities. But after covering that part of the journey, the rest of the trip was mostly straight highways. Highways could get tedious, with speed limits dropping to 60 or 65. I typically cruised at around 70 or 75, but I had to stay alert. Ohio, especially, was known for its heavy police presence. After my call with Tracy, I stopped at a gas station to grab a soda. The cashier, a young man, caught sight of my car and looked at me with curiosity. "Great car, sir. Is that a probe?" he asked. His knowledge impressed me, considering he probably hadn't even been born when the car stopped production. "Yes, that's her," I replied proudly, standing tall. "It's a retirement gift I recently picked up in Washington, and now I'm driving it back to Illinois." "Wow, she's very cute," he said, grinning. I nodded in acknowledgement and walked confidently back to my car. Feeling the urge to show off a little, I squeezed the clutch and shifted gears, squealing the tires slightly. A satisfying sound not always easy to achieve with a front-wheel drive car. As I drove, I thought about the weekend I just spent with my daughter, son-in-law, and my only grandson. Those moments were precious. Now that I was retired, I had silently promised myself to spend more time with my grandson in person. While I enjoyed seeing him over FaceTime, nothing could compare to the joy of his physical presence. Driving along, I passed a car filled with teenage girls who honked their horns in greeting. My gray hair fluttered in the wind, and I couldn't help but smile. The girl behind the wheel reminded me of Tracy in her youth. Long blonde hair, a graceful figure, and those sparkling blue eyes. Tracy had been the life of the party back then. Of course, at 63, she wasn't the same girl I met in college. Life had added a few extra pounds and perhaps more artificial blonde than natural, but she was still stunning. She had an energy that attracted attention, even from younger people. I remembered last fall when she decided to wear a bold pink sweater to a museum opening. I could tell she was shy about the revealing outfit, but she wore it because she knew I liked the look. I made sure to thank her for the gesture. I first met Tracy during my sophomore year at Indiana State University. She had just moved into my dorm, where I'd already been living for 2 years. My friends and I were playing frisbee outside when Tracy arrived with her parents to check in. The moment I saw her, I was mesmerized. My infatuation must have been obvious because one of my friends accidentally hit me with a throw while I was staring. Needless to say, I'll never forget that day. I abandoned the game and approached Tracy and her family to offer help with their bags. Unfortunately, Tracy's father took one look at my long, curly hair and declined my offer. Politely but firmly. Embarrassed, I stepped back. A week later, I saw Tracy again in the dorm and introduced myself. She didn't seem particularly interested, so I backed off quickly. 2 weeks after that, I noticed her walking with another guy from the dorm, someone who lived 2 floors above me. He looked like a nerd with his short, bristly mustache. Clearly, I wasn't her type. At the time, her lack of interest didn't bother me. Tracy wasn't part of my social circle, and I was doing fine with other girls. I didn't feel the need to chase after someone who didn't seem to care. 2 years later, though, everything changed. She unexpectedly showed up at a pre-semester party hosted by mutual friends. Mr. Bristly Mustache had already graduated, and she came alone. I decided to give it another try. By then, I'd matured enough to handle rejection if it happened. I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. Tracy stood out among the business students even back then. She was smart, confident, and unwilling to conform to traditional business norms. While other students, especially the guys, saw her as pushy, I saw someone quietly strong. I suspected they were intimidated by her intelligence. When I approached her at the party, I didn't expect much, but it was obvious she felt uncomfortable being alone in a crowded room. Her expression reminded me of a drowning person suddenly offered a helping hand. I leaned in and gently said, "Do you always take 2 steps back when someone approaches?" "Beers?" she asked sharply, eyeing the glasses in my hands with careful scrutiny. I almost shot back a sarcastic remark but managed to hold my tongue. "Mostly," I replied dispassionately. "I'm a pretty versatile guy." I tried not to show any particular preference as I turned to leave. To my surprise, she shook her head slightly, reached out, and touched my right forearm, stopping me in my tracks. She invaded my personal space, standing on tiptoe to meet my towering height. Before I could react, she grabbed my shoulders, pulled me closer, and kissed me gently on the lips. I froze, stunned. Stepping back, she looked up at me with her soft blue eyes, mesmerizing me completely. Without thinking, I held her close and kissed her again, gently, carefully, trying not to spill the beers in my hands. We decided to leave the party and spent the next couple of hours chatting in a quiet corner of the dorm's living room. That night changed everything. From that moment on, we were inseparable, eventually tying the knot shortly after graduating. Her parents disapproved of me, but I didn't care. I knew Tracy was the one. After university, we both secured great jobs, and life settled into a routine. We were happy. We continued sleeping together, though not as often as when we were students. Life has a way of taking over. 3 years after the wedding, Allison was born. She brought an immeasurable amount of joy to both of us. We used to compete to hold her in our arms, especially when we visited her grandparents. I swear, for the first 2 years of her life, Allison barely touched the ground during those visits. As I reminisced about those early years, a sense of joy filled me. I looked up and realized I had reached the first exit for Columbus. I ignored it. My only desire was to go home to Tracy. The thought of surprising her, climbing into bed beside her in the middle of the night, was too tempting to resist. I stopped briefly at a bus stop restaurant to cancel the hotel room. While there, I called Tracy, pretending to check in from my supposed hotel room. She answered the call, sounding flustered and slightly out of breath. It was as if she'd hurried to find her phone. "Hey, save that breath for me for tomorrow," I teased lightly. "Of course, honey," she replied, her voice calming. "I've missed you so much," I added, and the words felt sincere, even to me. She responded with a quiet "aha," and we ended the conversation. I quickly finished my meal, refueled the car, and set off again. The night had fallen. I closed the windows and hatch, eliminating the distraction of the wind. My Ford Probe hummed steadily as I drove, memories of Tracy and our life together flooding my mind. 39 years. Where had all that time gone? It was 4:30 a.m. when I finally reached home. I parked the Ford Probe on the street, intending to pull it into the garage later. However, as I approached the garage door with the remote in hand, I noticed something strange. An unfamiliar car, a Mercedes, was parked in my spot. A sudden wave of panic hit me like a punch to the chest. My limbs trembled, sweat broke out on my forehead, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, but the car, someone else's car, was still there, parked in my wife's garage. Confused and dazed, I turned off the engine and sat in silence, staring at the Mercedes. After a moment of hesitation, I crept to the car, opened the passenger door, and checked the glove compartment for the registration. When I saw the name on the papers, my heart sank. Ralph Pruitt. Tracy's former boss. The man had retired 6 months ago. Disappointment and fury surged through me, but I forced myself to think. My first instinct was to grab my 9mm Sig Sauer and deal with them both. But as the thought of a physical confrontation lingered, I realized it wasn't worth ruining my life or ending up in jail over this betrayal. Quietly, I entered the house. The silence was deafening. My hands trembled as I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped inside. What I saw confirmed everything. Tracy was curled up in bed, clinging to Ralph's right shoulder. His arm was wrapped around her in a way that felt disturbingly familiar, a painful reminder of how Tracy and I used to sleep. I stood there, frozen. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I couldn't help but appreciate the iPhone's night mode as I snapped 2 clear photos of them lying together in the soft glow of the room. Calmly, I set down the phone. My emotions swirled. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but I remained collected. I knew that what I did next would determine the rest of my life. I grabbed enough clothes from the drawers and closet to last several days. Bumping into a suitcase in the hallway closet, I quickly packed my things. Taking my firearm, I quietly slipped out of the house through the garage. On impulse, I took out a knife and punctured all 4 tires on both Tracy's Lincoln and Ralph's Mercedes. Jumping into my Ford Probe, I drove a short distance to a nearby spot where I could observe the house from afar. I knew Tracy, being retired, could afford to sleep in, while Ralph would need to leave for work early to avoid arousing suspicion among the neighbors. From my vantage point, I couldn't see into the garage, but it wasn't long before the damage became evident. Around 8:30 a.m., a truck from Fred's tire shop pulled up. As I watched them replace the tires, I couldn't help but wonder, had Ralph paid for Tracy's tires too, or did she have to cover the cost herself? I also debated whether they'd have the courage to involve the police. Even if they didn't suspect my role in the vandalism, calling law enforcement would open a Pandora's box of questions. Questions they might not want to answer. Once Ralph left the house around 10 a.m., I assumed Tracy hurriedly changed the bed linens and erased any other evidence of his presence. I wasn't about to stick around to confirm it. I got back on the road and headed to Omaha, Nebraska, to visit an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time. Tracy called me when I didn't arrive home by 3 p.m. as planned. I answered quickly, mentally noting that I needed to install Bluetooth in my old probe soon. "Where are you?" she asked cautiously. "You should be home by now." "I'm in the middle of Iowa, heading toward Spencer," I replied flatly. "What are you doing in Iowa? I know you love driving, but do you really love that car more than me?" "At the moment, yes," I answered honestly, and then hung up. A few minutes later, I stopped, pulled up the photo of Ralph sleeping in our bed, and sent it to her. No response. I pressed on the gas and continued toward Spencer. For 3 days, my friends Spencer and Marin patiently endured my silence and grumpiness as I recounted the latest developments in my marriage. Being surrounded by people who knew and cared for me helped more than I could express. Words weren't always necessary when you shared a lifetime of love and support. As I prepared to leave, Marin hugged me tightly. "You'll always have a place here, no matter what," she assured me. The drive home was long and heavy. For the first time in memory, I didn't exceed the speed limit, not even by a fraction. It took me over 6 hours of slow, deliberate driving to process my grief and racing thoughts. I grieved for the end of my marriage, because by then, I was almost certain that Tracy and I wouldn't celebrate our 40th anniversary together. The familiar questions tormented me. Had I made mistakes? Could I no longer satisfy Tracy in bed? Did she find in Ralph something I couldn't give her? What does the future hold for me without her after 39 years? For a fleeting moment, I thought about forgiving her. Maybe we could try to save our marriage, if that's what she wanted. But I quickly pushed the thought away. Deep down, I knew I could never forget the image of them lying together in our bed. True forgiveness requires the ability to let go and forget, and I knew that wasn't possible. Staying would only breed bitterness and resentment. Divorce, I realized, was the only choice. Painful, yes, but the best one for both of us. When I finally pulled into the driveway and opened the garage door, Tracy's Lincoln was the only car there. I unloaded my suitcase, took a deep breath, and walked into the house. Tracy was sitting on the couch in the family room, a half-empty glass of red wine beside her. I grabbed a Corona from the refrigerator and sat down in the armchair across from her. When our eyes met, I saw the tears welling up in her blue eyes. She sat up slightly, her face etched with anguish, but she didn't break down. "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off before she could speak. "Don't cry. I don't need your pity right now. If anyone had a reason to cry, it was me. How could she betray us? How could she betray me? 39 years had passed in the blink of an eye, and yet here we were, our marriage broken beyond repair. In an instant, my mind was flooded with doubts. Were any of those years real? Maybe the first 10 or 20 years of our marriage. When had she stopped loving me? "Andy, I want you to know that my love for you has never waned," she whispered. "Over time, it only got stronger, despite the pain I caused you. I don't know how to fix this, but I know your love for me may not be as strong as before." "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice sharp. "I refuse to believe this is a one-time incident. Your words imply this has happened more often than you care to admit. Are others involved? Have you been cheating with our friends?" Her expression shifted instantly from fear to anger. I wondered if I had stumbled upon a painful truth. "How dare you suggest I might betray you with one of our friends? That's outrageous and disrespectful," she snapped, her voice dripping with resentment. "It looks like I'm not that far off, my dear," I interrupted coolly. She made an annoyed sound and fell silent. Her expression changed, now weary, as though she feared I might lose control. But she knew me well enough to realize I would never harm her, no matter how I looked in that moment. She started to speak but stopped, perhaps realizing that her lies were too fragile to withstand scrutiny. Finally, she exhaled deeply and said, "He's the only one. This has been happening for quite some time, maybe 5 or 6 years. I felt a rush of dizziness, my stomach twisting into knots. My eyebrows shot up as I processed her words. We started seeing each other once or twice a week, mainly when you were away on business trips. At first, I would stay alone for a few nights, but once Ralph and I got comfortable, it became a routine," she explained, her tone unnervingly flat, as though she were discussing a math equation. "Once or twice a week, for 5 or 6 years. I sat there stunned. I must have been either incredibly naive or exceptionally trusting, or both. "It's not that complicated," she added casually. "You trust me completely, so I just had to come up with reasonable excuses for my absence." I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, excuse me for trusting my wife of more than 30 years, I said, throwing my head back as I finished my beer. I got up to grab another beer, noticing her glass was empty too. "Another one?" I asked. "Yes, please," she replied cheerfully, as though we weren't discussing the collapse of our marriage. I returned with my beer and refilled her glass with wine before sitting back down. Leaning forward, I asked, "Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy? I could have changed something. Or at the very least, we could have parted on better terms." "I'm not unhappy, and I don't want a divorce," she said bluntly. "I've already told you, I love you, and I meant it. I want us to grow old together." My confusion must have been written all over my face. "Listen, Alice," I said, my voice sharp. This isn't Wonderland. You can't cheat on me for years and then expect me to ride in on a white horse and take you to some fantasy land of eternity. And that's why we're discussing this, she replied, her voice calm but laced with disappointment. She called me Andy, but the way she said it, formal and clipped, was a clear sign of her dissatisfaction. You're smart, Andy. There's no reason we can't come to a decision, even if it means breaking things off with Ralph. I care about you and only you. My relationship with Ralph is purely physical. You could say it's just intimacy. Although, yes, our closeness is pleasant, it's just a small part of what connects us. Our connection runs deeper than that. I sat there, stunned by her indifference. How could she say these things so casually? Wait a minute, I finally said, incredulous. Do you actually think I'm going to let you keep seeing Ralph? Her expression hardened. Andy, the way you say that is incredibly disrespectful. Disrespected? She felt disrespected? The irony of it all nearly choked me. Tracy, you've been having an affair for 5 or 6 years, and you don't see the seriousness of it? My voice trembled with anger. What's going on with you? She sipped her wine, her expression carefully neutral, but I studied her face intently. My God, I thought, I'm so lucky. Despite her betrayal, she looked radiant, like a woman half her age. At 63, she had the energy and figure of someone 30 years younger. You remember a few years ago, she began, after menopause, when I seemed to have gained this renewed energy? I nodded, recalling how amazed we both had been by her newfound vitality. Her doctor had called it some rare phenomenon that occurs in about 10% of women, where hormonal changes brought about an unexpected boost in youthfulness. We had marveled at her energy back then, and our intimate life had only improved. I had been so happy to support her through it, thinking it was a gift to both of us. And yet here we were, her gift had become a curse I hadn't seen coming. Thanks to medical intervention, Ralph noticed my radiant appearance and newfound vitality. Tracy continued, her tone composed. We had worked together as colleagues for about 4 years, building a strong friendship. At first, it was just light-hearted, frivolous flirting, which I found invigorating. I was pleased to realize that, at this stage of my life, a man still saw me as attractive and playful. I couldn't take it anymore. I've always admired your sensuality, I interrupted sharply. I tried to connect with you, to deepen our relationship. Didn't that matter to you? I'm your husband, after all. Her gaze held steady. But the real interest came from someone else, Andy, from Ralph. I admit it was exciting. I clenched my jaw as she continued her story with alarming indifference. You had to leave for Houston on a short business trip. I don't even remember the reason. That Saturday night, I invited Ralph over for dinner. One thing led to another, and I found myself taking him upstairs. That was the first time we truly connected. Her words landed like blows, each one heavier than the last. It was exciting and unforgettable, she continued. Part of the thrill came from the forbidden nature of it all, and partly because Ralph was unlike anyone I had met before. After the second round, we rested for a few hours before he left. Every time he visited, we quietly parked his car in the garage, and he always left before dawn to avoid attracting attention. I scoffed bitterly. Who exactly were you trying to impress? The neighbors? Clearly, it wasn't me, considering you were in bed with another man. Tracy shifted uncomfortably, taking another sip of her wine. I must admit, she said softly, that I didn't wake up feeling guilty after that first time. The only time I felt even a hint of remorse was when you came home that night. I avoided you for days, afraid that my betrayal was written on my skin like a stain. But when you didn't notice, the guilt dissipated. It became easier, almost natural, to invite him back. I just needed to be careful not to hurt you. I stared at her, incredulous. You didn't want to hurt me? You gave him some of my things, Tracy. Your body is yours, but we vowed to be faithful. I took our vows seriously 39 years ago. I never imagined there was an expiration date written in fine print. Her tone grew defensive. Andy, you're exaggerating. Have you even thought about the consequences of a breakup? Living alone in a retirement apartment? What do we both gain from that? Why are we even having this conversation? Because you cheated on me, Tracy. I exploded. She stayed eerily calm. I care about you, Andy. I know you're upset with me, but deep down, you care about me too. If you want me to end my relationship with Ralph, I'll do it. Her words stoked my anger further. I don't want you seeing Ralph anymore, especially while we're still married, I shouted. Once we're divorced, you can spend as much time with him as you like. I won't care. Tracy looked at me coldly. Divorce? That's not going to happen, Andy, she said flatly. I stood abruptly, my mind made up. Without another word, I packed a suitcase with clean clothes and grabbed a few personal items. My movements were mechanical. I left the house, got in my car, and drove to the nearest budget motel, where I planned to stay for the next few days. The next day, I called my old friend and lawyer, Willie Joseph, and arranged to meet him for lunch. We chose an Italian restaurant, where I shared the sad details of my marriage's collapse over a veal and pepper sandwich. Willie listened, his concern evident. Do you think she might have signs of early dementia? He asked. This just doesn't sound like the Tracy I've known for all these years. I nodded thoughtfully. I agree, I replied, though I didn't know what to make of it all. Willie sighed and leaned back. Andy, you're being soft about this, aren't you? I told Willie to handle everything fairly, I admitted. Tracy has been by my side for 39 years. I don't see the point in being cruel now. I explained my terms. I asked Willie to transfer the fully paid house to Tracy and give me the equivalent amount in cash as compensation. I knew I'd never be able to set foot in that house again without imagining her and Ralph in our bed. Willie looked at me carefully. Do you really think reconciliation is impossible? You two have grown old together, Andy. You've shared almost a lifetime. I shook my head. It's too late, Willie. I can't forget what I've seen. He nodded reluctantly. Are the standard 2-week deadlines for the paperwork acceptable? That'll be fine, I replied. Dispassionately, I told Willie, I'm hoping for a rush service, and I'm ready to pay extra for it. Can you get it done by Friday? Why such a rush? You said you don't hold a grudge. You didn't complete the tasks I called necessary, I snapped. You didn't even go to the bank. I can't handle her attitude, Willie. She's too optimistic. Maybe I'll change my mind and let her stay with Ralph. Wow, that's for sure, Willie replied. But Friday is too early. It's important you understand the gravity of this situation, Willie. In the days that followed, Tracy continued to communicate with me through phone calls and messages. She expressed a desire to make peace, apologized for the pain she caused, and criticized my obvious stubbornness and immaturity. Yet, glaringly, there was no apology for her actions in our relationship. On Tuesday evening, I called my daughter Allison and son-in-law Ron to inform them about the divorce and its reasons. Their shock mirrored my own when I'd first discovered the truth. Through the tears that spilled freely, Allison cautiously broached the topic of reconciliation. You've been together for so long, Dad. Now that you're both retired, isn't it time to relax together by the fireplace with a glass of wine? That was the original plan, dear, I replied quietly. But your mom has a different perspective. She thinks that once I let go of my anger, everything will fall into place. The truth is, it's not just a one-time mistake. Their affair has been going on for 5 years, Allison. They were even intimate in our own bed. Without hesitation, I sent her the photo of Tracy and Ralph asleep in our bed. The sharp sighs from both Allison and Ron echoed through the phone. That image is burned into my mind, I said bitterly. I know it will fade with time, but the pain will remain. Allison's voice trembled as she spoke. It's been 39 years, Dad. Then she turned to Ron. If you were in Dad's shoes, would you ever forgive me after something like that? A heavy pause followed. I imagined Allison looking at Ron, hoping for a forgiving response. But I knew Ron's principles were firm. No, Dad, Ron said finally. I wouldn't forgive her. I wouldn't discount the possibility of resorting to physical violence. Ron, Allison exclaimed, shocked. I'm just telling it like it is, Ellie, Ron replied calmly. If you did something like that to me, it'd be metaphorical death. At noon on Friday, Willie called to inform me that Tracy had been served with the subpoena. According to my assistant, she looked shocked, then devastated, he said. I arrived at the house around 2 p.m. to collect the rest of my belongings. Tracy was sitting at the kitchen table, clutching a glass of wine and a half-empty bottle. As I passed her on my way to the stairs, she muttered bitterly, "You're so cruel. It's only been 4 days, and you're already considering nursing home options." I stopped in my tracks as she continued. "I've already told you, Andy, there won't be a divorce. We'll fight this together. We'll get through this. I love you, and that doesn't change anything." I shook my head. "It's not a farce, Tracy. I refuse to settle for the role of an old man who just accepts it. You broke our vows many times, and now you think that just because we're older I should forgive and forget? I can't forgive, and I won't forget." Her tears started to flow, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the urge to hold her close, to promise everything would get better. After 39 years of marriage, love doesn't disappear suddenly. But I couldn't ignore what had happened. "Tracy, I believe you still love me," I said softly. "But it's not the same all-consuming love that it once was. Ralph changed everything. I was devoted to you, Tracy. I had no backup plan, no alternative. It was just us. And now it's you, me, Ralph, and whoever comes after him." Her sobs grew louder as I silently turned and went upstairs. Tracy decided to challenge the divorce, and her lawyer convinced the judge to order counseling sessions for us. Willie advised me to comply and stay calm. "Don't upset the judge, Andy, or you'll just delay the process." We both arrived early for the first session with Dr. Ruth Warlingham. In the waiting room, Tracy tried to chat with me, but I kept my answers brief, unwilling to engage in small talk. Dr. Warlingham, who insisted we not call her Dr. Ruth, led us to her office. Though she offered drinks, we politely declined. She began by laying out the ground rules. No shouting, no name-calling, no swearing, no interruptions. "For the first violation, you'll get a warning," she explained. "If it happens a second time, the judge will be notified." Dr. Ruth warned us at the beginning of the session that any insubordination, shouting, name-calling, or sarcasm would result in consequences, including a formal report to the judge. As I sat silently, I considered what actions I should take, until Dr. Ruth advised me to listen to others rather than respond with immediate defensiveness. I took her advice into consideration. As someone who felt deeply insulted, I was allowed to tell my side of the story first. Tracy looked impatient and tried to interrupt, but Dr. Ruth promptly stopped her. When Tracy finally shared her perspective, it matched mine in most respects, except for one. She mentioned that because of my busy work schedule, she had sought solace in a new friend. When I was given the opportunity to respond, I clarified, "I rarely travel for work. usually only a few days a month. Tracy's claim of loneliness was unfounded. Dr. Ruth nodded and jotted down a note in her notebook, signaling she understood my position. The doctor then shifted the conversation to the possible consequences of divorce. "Mr. Andy, are you aiming for success in this case?" I sighed, feeling the weight of exhaustion. "No, I'm not aiming to win. There's no triumph here, only heartache. My goal is to minimize my losses. The one who has been the center of my world for almost 4 decades is no longer with me. Everything revolved around her. But now that she's gone, there's no way to fill that void. Perhaps I'll spend my old age alone because the woman who meant everything to me didn't value our relationship enough to remain faithful." Dr. Ruth regarded me solemnly. "This seems very serious, Mr. Andy. You're not one to exaggerate. So why has this situation hurt you so much?" "You're right, doctor," I said quietly. "I usually keep my emotions under control. But this is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Just weeks ago, I felt invincible, retired, excited, and even received a car as a gift from the woman I loved. Tracy and I were planning a trip across the country to visit museums, zoos, and all the attractions we dreamed of seeing together. It was supposed to be a dream come true, until I discovered that her feelings for me didn't match my own. A heavy silence filled the room, punctuated only by the ticking of a wall clock. Dr. Ruth turned to Tracy. "Now, Tracy, share your thoughts." Tracy began softly, expressing her deep affection for me. "My love for Andy remains unshakable," she said, almost pleadingly. "But my concern has always been about physical intimacy, not emotional connection." She repeated her previous explanations, but her words rang hollow to me. I struggled to hide my disinterest as she continued. "The first time Ralph and I got close," she began, "was the night after you left for Houston. That Saturday, I felt lonely and awkward, so I invited Ralph over for dinner. I hadn't planned anything. He simply took my invitation as something more. He flirted with me more than usual, and when we started kissing, it just felt like a natural extension of our friendship. The experience was incredible," she added, almost wistfully. The excitement was amplified by the forbidden nature of it all. It was the first time in 42 years that I'd been physically close to anyone other than you. But Ralph behaved like a true gentleman, which made the experience even more memorable. "Still," she continued, "there were no romantic feelings between us, just a certain connection. I love you, Andy. We're friends, close friends. After it happened, I didn't feel as guilty as I expected to. You didn't notice anything, and I realized that as long as I wasn't taking anything away from you, nothing had to change. Even if you hadn't come home early that night," she added, "you wouldn't have noticed. You still would have loved me unconditionally." Tracy's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Can't we just ignore what happened on Sunday night and go back to how things were before? Is this really all because of your pride?" Her words hit me like a slap. Suddenly, it all made sense. It wasn't about love, it was about me. My pride, my trust, my shattered ego. Dr. Ruth glanced at her watch. "Our time is up for today," she announced. "Mr. Andy, you weren't very cooperative today," she remarked gently. I couldn't resist a sarcastic reply. "I didn't shoot her today, did I?" "Mr. Andy," the consultant warned firmly, "sarcasm won't help you here." Feeling frustrated, I stood and left the office. In the parking lot, Tracy tried to strike up a conversation, but I waved her off. I craved solitude, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the hurt, the absurdity of it all, pressed on my chest. When I finally climbed into my old car, I turned the key in the ignition and let the familiar hum of the engine calm me. Without a glance back, I turned onto the highway, heading east, toward a destination I couldn't yet name, but away from the woman I could no longer recognize. After driving for several hours toward the Indiana border, I stopped at a rest stop to refuel. I sat there for a while before pressing the gas pedal and heading back home. Driving had become my monotonous routine, my only solace found behind the wheel of my 16-year-old car. Following our separate consultations, Tracy and I were scheduled to have a joint session with Dr. Worlingham. I didn't ask about Tracy's conversation with the psychologist. It didn't matter, and she probably wouldn't have shared anyway. Dr. Worlingham's instructions confused me. She seemed to oscillate between trying to convince me to forgive Tracy and warning me about the possible consequences of refusal, namely a lonely old age. Yet that was already my reality. Loneliness. Even with Tracy physically present, I felt completely alone. Once I thought of us as two halves of a whole, but over time, she had distanced herself, and now we were simply two separate entities. Our relationship had become one-sided. Everything seemed to revolve around her. Ralph and I were just footnotes in her story. I expressed my inability to accept this situation, but Dr. Worlingham reminded me of Tracy's claim. She loved only me. The affair, she said, was not about love but physical attraction. Really, Doc? I snapped, my frustration breaking through. Shouldn't you, as a qualified therapist, see the truth? Well, Mr. Andy, the doctor replied, why don't you tell me your version of things so I can better understand your perspective? I sat forward. Can I be honest here, or should I tread carefully? Be as honest as you'd like, she replied. Taking a deep breath, I said, I think Tracy still cares about me, but not like before. If she did, she wouldn't have even thought about being with another man. I don't buy the excuse that it's just physical. There's clearly emotional connection there, too. She admitted they're close friends, too close in my opinion. If you're truly devoted to someone, you don't have feelings like that for another person. I continued, watching Dr. Worlingham's expression. She tried to maintain a neutral demeanor, but I caught subtle reactions. A flicker of her brows, a slight shift in her gaze. Doctor, I asked, when your partner has an intimate relationship with someone else in your own bed, what does that say about their respect for you? And when we talk about love and respect, how does the fact that it's gone on for 5 years affect that? A one-time affair can be written off as a fleeting impulse. But 5 years. I paused, my voice trembling slightly. Does she think I'm stupid? Even if it's only physical, how do I ignore or forgive a betrayal that lasted that long? Everyone seems focused on the fact that we're older, so I should forgive her and move on. But what difference does it make if I spend my last years alone? I'm already lonely. She left me the moment she chose to be with him. Whether I live alone in an apartment or in a separate room under the same roof as her, the result is the same. I'm alone. I shook my head, my voice hardening. And one more thing, Doctor. Tracy has admitted she hurt me and regrets her actions, but she's never truly apologized. She enjoyed the attention of another man, willingly had an affair, but she's shown no real remorse. Has she ever expressed regret to you? Finished. I got up and began to pace the room. The anger and exhaustion weighed me down, and finally, I sank back into my chair. All your considerations are valid, Mr. Andy, Dr. Worlingham said gently. We'll discuss them further at the next meeting. Yes, well, I replied dispassionately, standing to leave. At our joint session the following week, Dr. Worlingham began by asking Tracy to share her thoughts. I don't want to end my relationship with Andy, she said, her voice trembling. I sincerely believe we can cope with this and return to a happy life. On reflection, I realized my previous apologies weren't enough to express my sincere remorse for betraying his trust. I understand now that my actions caused him pain. Andy, please forgive me. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued, "I deeply regret what I've done. I don't want our marriage to end like this, after so many years spent together. You deserve better." I glanced at Dr. Warlingham and caught a fleeting smirk on her face, a smirk that disappeared the moment our eyes met. The room fell into a deafening silence, the ticking clock suddenly louder than ever. I sat there, unmoved. Tracy's words rang hollow, like rehearsed lines in a play. The weight of 39 years pressed down on me, years that once seemed unshakable. Otherwise, I could have done something regrettable. I confessed to Dr. Warlingham. The fact that Tracy was close to him for more than 5 years shows she doesn't truly regret it. Maybe I could forgive her sleeping with him once or twice. A stupid, impulsive act while drunk that broke our vows. But I can't suddenly forgive a betrayal that lasted over 5 years. That doesn't align with who I am. My words seemed to strike Tracy hard. She looked visibly worried. The doctor, on the other hand, looked shocked and began furiously scribbling notes. Although I knew I would most likely be reprimanded for my comments, I couldn't stop myself from expressing my disappointment. "It's been 2 months since we broke up," I said abruptly, my voice laced with tension. "So tell me, Tracy, how many times have you been with him since I left?" Her face turned a deep shade of red, and she struggled to respond. The doctor's expression mirrored her embarrassment, though it was unclear if it stemmed from the awkwardness of the situation or my own awareness of the truth. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of bitter satisfaction. I tried to reassure myself that at least it wasn't happening in our former bed anymore. But Tracy said nothing. Instead, she stared at the carpet, fixating on its texture, her silence louder than any confession. I stood up nervously, meeting the doctor's gaze. Dr. Warlingham shifted uncomfortably in his chair before speaking. "I'm not in a position to decide whether today's discussion was ethically questionable," he said carefully. "But your comments may not have been entirely appropriate." He paused. "I think we're done here. I'll have to tell the judge I don't believe additional counseling will help." Tracy sat there in shock as I rose to leave. "So that's it?" she exclaimed. 39 years have passed in an instant? I never thought you could be so heartless and vicious. I guess I overestimated you." I stopped in the doorway and quietly replied, "I never imagined you to be dishonest or promiscuous, Tracy. That was my mistake." It had been 6 years since my last visit to Normal, Illinois, and as I pulled into the funeral home parking lot, memories came flooding back. I knew the reception wouldn't start for another hour, but Allison had asked me to arrive early to speak privately before the other guests arrived. My ex-wife, Tracy, had passed away. 2 days prior, Allison and Ron had come from Washington to organize the funeral, fulfilling her final requests. Allison had reached out to offer me a role in the preparations, helping with the arrangements or delivering a speech. "Despite everything, Dad," she had said, "you and Mom had a successful marriage that lasted 39 years. You probably understood her better than anyone else." She may have been right, but the truth was hard to ignore. In the 8 years since our divorce, Tracy and I had barely spoken. The last meaningful conversation we'd had was during my final session with Dr. Warlingham. As I parked, I saw Allison rushing out to greet me, followed by Ron and my grandson. No matter how much time passed, Allison always greeted me the same way, warmly, with a hug. At 47 years old, she still leapt into my arms like a teenager, though I quickly realized that at 71, I wasn't as agile as I used to be. I hugged her tightly, kissed her cheek, and gently set her down. "Allison," I said with a smile, "this is Kay, my partner on this adventure." Kay, who had just stepped out of the passenger side, smiled warmly. Despite being only 2 years older than my daughter, She had kindly agreed to accompany me on the 15-hour drive. We stopped a half-hour ago to refresh ourselves, I explained, because we've already spent 6 hours on the road today. Allison and Ron looked at me in shock. 8 hours of driving yesterday? At your age? Allison exclaimed. And he wouldn't let me drive even for a minute, Kay added teasingly. You probably know your father better than anyone. He's very selective about who he lets drive his car. Ron, clearly trying to break the tension, smiled sheepishly. Actually, I drove it before him, he admitted, recounting how he'd test-driven the Ford Probe before my wife bought it for me. Realizing his mistake, Ron's voice trailed off awkwardly. I quickly intervened to ease the situation. It turned out to be Tracy's last gift to me, I reflected softly. If she hadn't given me that car, I never would have uncovered her infidelity. It was both a blessing and a curse. Allison nodded quietly. I think she always thought of it as a curse, she added. She claimed to love you to the very end, Dad. But she felt abandoned by you. I can't imagine what she was thinking, I said, shaking my head. Allison's voice softened. She continued seeing that man for 3 more years after the divorce, until he was transferred to Colorado, and he never invited her to go with him. Tracy held a grudge, blaming him for the fact that our relationship had ended. Even on her deathbed, I don't think she ever realized that our family had broken up because of her choices. At the funeral home, I chose not to sit with Allison, Ron, and the kids. It didn't feel right. What had once connected us was now nothing more than a distant memory. During the eulogy, Kay and I sat silently in the last row. The pastor delivered a heartfelt speech about Tracy, moving many people to tears, but not me. I had cried all my tears for Tracy a long time ago. After the service, we returned to what had once been Tracy's house, the house we used to live in together. Old friends, many of whom I hadn't seen in years, greeted us with expressions of sympathy. Kay stood by my side, quietly supportive, holding my hand whenever I needed her steady reassurance. When we entered the house, I was struck by how little had changed. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. She left everything untouched, Allison commented softly, noticing my surprise. She hoped you'd come back someday. She didn't even change the locks. If you still have the key, I'm sure it works. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the car key, holding it up like a trophy. No, I replied. I only kept the car key. While Allison prepared coffee, I arranged cups and saucers for the 6 of us, easily navigating the kitchen as though I'd never left. As we worked side by side, she leaned over and said quietly, You know, Dad, some people thought it was rude to bring your younger companion to Mom's funeral. I kind of understand where they're coming from. I raised my eyebrows knowingly as she poured the coffee. When everyone had gathered at the kitchen table, I decided to address the issue head-on. I've already said that Kay is my traveling companion, not a romantic interest, I began calmly. We've been friends in Houston for many years. Knowing I had a long, stressful journey ahead, she kindly offered to accompany me. I paused for a moment, then added with a small smirk. Perhaps I overdid it by calling her a friend with privileges. But honestly, she's just one of many of my friends of this kind. My grandson laughed out loud at my comment, and Allison and Ron exchanged surprised glances. 8 years ago, I continued, Kay, the head of the Quattro Queen Bridge Club, welcomed me into her circle with open arms. Our friendship blossomed quickly, and before long, we became inseparable companions, especially during our bridge games. Kay smiled as she picked up the story. As we got older, it became increasingly difficult for us to find single men like your father. So, my 3 closest friends, also bridge club members, and I came to a mutual agreement. Allison and Ron looked at her curiously. What kind of agreement? Ron asked. Kay explained matter-of-factly. This agreement guaranteed that we'd remain healthy, happy, and free of jealousy. After all, Ellie, no more than 2 people participate at a time. We wouldn't want to overload your father. Ron looked stunned, while my grandson burst into laughter again. Your father is very healthy for his age, my dears, Kay continued, smiling playfully. Nowadays, there are pills that help men cope with certain challenges. And, as you know, a man's intelligence never fades. Does it? At that, Allison and Ron finally shared a moment of understanding, shaking their heads in amusement. Looking around the table, I couldn't help but reflect. Everyone, including me, had thought I'd end up alone and bitter after the divorce. But life had taken an unexpected turn. Surrounded by family, old friends, and Kay, who had been an unwavering source of companionship, I realized that things had turned out far better than I ever could have imagined. Smiling, I said softly, "For this old man, everything turned out just fine."